Welcome, everyone. Hello, and it is a great pleasure to have you back at the SDG tent, an amazing space where we can have open conversation, thought-provoking discussions, and really think about how can we all together make sure that we reach the SDGs. Now, for today, the SDG that we will be focusing on is SDG 2, zero hunger. And who better to tell us about how the world is doing on that front but David Beasley, our one and only executive director of the UN World Food Programme, WFP, and also, of course, the organization that was awarded, and absolutely justifiably so, the Nobel Peace Prize last year, which made a lot of people very proud and very excited. Now, first, a couple of words about myself. I'm Geraldine Matchett. I am the co-CEO and CFO of Royal DSM. And I have to say, in my career as a CFO, I have been called a bit of a maverick. Why? Well, because I'm actually a graduate in geography and sustainable development. And therefore, for me, the fact that a thriving society requires a healthy physical environment and a very healthy social environment makes complete sense. And I'm therefore very lucky that that's what I studied, because it means that the fact that SDGs all hang together is total logic. So it's helpful. But enough about me, maybe a couple of words also about DSM. Now, we are a nutrition, health, and sustainable living company going back more than 100 years. And in the context of our conversation today on hunger and malnutrition, what makes us relevant is that we are the world leader when it comes to micronutrients, i.e., what makes food actually nutritious, both for people and for animals. And our science around that goes back a long, long way. But we also happen to be a long-standing partner of WFP in the fight to eradicate hunger and malnutrition. So it's an extra pleasure to be welcoming you, David, here on this conversation today. Now, maybe before we dive in, and I know we will have far too much to talk about, so let's see if I can put a little structure around it to get ourselves started. Firstly, a few observations. It's probably good for all of us in this conversation to remember that in 1950, 70% of the world population lived in extreme poverty, 7-0. Fast forward a few decades, and the number of people in extreme poverty is below 10%. So one can say a lot has been achieved. Unfortunately, though, over the last, say, year and a half, we seem to have gone backwards the equivalent of 10 years of progress when it comes to facing hunger and malnutrition. And as a result, the latest statistics, and David, you'll tell us more about this, shows that about 2 billion people suffer from food insecurity today, which is, of course, an extremely big challenge. And why has it gone backwards? Well, we all know the pandemic has come on top of the issues of climate-related events, conflicts, inequality, and adding this big insecurity by basically reducing incomes at the same time as making food more expensive. So we are facing an extra crisis right now, despite the fact that over the decades we were heading in the right direction. Now, to help our conversation today, I was thinking there's maybe three themes that we should, take the advantage of having you with us today to discuss. One is, where is the world right now? The other one is, why is hunger and malnutrition actually all about peace and all about all of the other SDGs? And thirdly, and importantly, what can we do about it, particularly working together? So the relevance of partnerships in addressing these challenges. So to get us started on theme one, and it is so nice to see you and to be able to hear, sorry to say this expression from the horse's mouth, what is going on the line. And in particular, so what are you seeing out there? And maybe if you don't mind sharing, what is keeping you awake at night? David.
Oh my goodness. Wow. If I answer all that, we'll be here all night long in this tent, this virtual tent of reality that we're facing, this fireside chat. Geraldine, it's always good to see you. And the partnership that we've had with DSM and you for 15 years has just been tremendous. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we have this chat. But, when it's it's really hard to believe that we've made so much progress in the last 200 years, actually. And particularly, as you were saying, the last 50, 25, 10 years, so much progress is being made, and now we're seen to be going backwards. We've built systems sharing more wealth than any time period in world history. But now we're going backwards, and the question is, what's going on here? And you put man-made conflict on the table, climate change, and on top of that, compounded by COVID, you begin to see it's an extraordinary, perfect alignment of the stars for a major storm that is truly impacting the world, unlike anything we've seen in our lifetime. And so the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, yes, I think they were sending, in fact, two very clear messages. I think one was, thank you, World Food Program, for your women and your men who lay their lives, on the line every day to help bring stability and peace and hope to literally 115 million people as of last year, for example. That's how many people we helped. But I think there was a second message that was equally as important, if not more so, and it was a call to action. I think the Nobel Peace Prize Committee saw that here's that perfect storm heading our way, because when I arrived at the World Food Program 4.5 years ago, we had about 80 million people marching to the brink of starvation. Now, about 700 million people go to bed every night hungry. And like you said, there's 2 billion people that have food security issues. But when you look about how much progress was made, we were down to 80 million marching towards starvation. Well, that number spiked to 135 pre-COVID. And the question why, and the answer was clearly man-made conflict. The second was climate change. And then add on top of that some fragile governance. Well, COVID comes around and just bam, all the progress that we were making, it just washes it away. So now we've got from 80 million to 135 million, now 135 million to 270 million people literally marching to the brink of starvation. And if we don't address these needs, literally you're going to have famine or starvation, or 2, mass destabilization, and 3, you will have clearly mass migration. And we've got solutions to this. And so you ask what keeps me up at night. A real simple question is, I don't go to bed. I had a reporter one time ask me, made a comment to me after a major interview. He said, Governor, you've got the greatest job on earth, saving the lives of people. And I thought about that for a second. I said, I do. I really do. But I don't go to bed at night thinking about the people we saved. I go to bed at night literally, weeping over the children we could not save, because if we don't have the money nor the access, particularly the money, then we have to choose which children eat or which children don't eat, which children live, which children die. I said, how would you like that job? And he looked at me and said, oh my God, I never thought about it. I said, well, we have to think about it every single day. And so that's what keeps me up at night, when I know there's enough wealth and enough food out there, and when we can't reach the people because of lack of money or lack of access. That keeps me up at night, because Geraldine, these aren't just statistics. These are real people. These are little girls and little boys. And what would we do if it was our little girl, our little boy? We would be all hands on deck. And so that keeps me up at night. But it's good to be with you to talk about, the solutions to how we're going to make this a better world and end hunger, hopefully in our lifetime.
Exactly. And thank you. And indeed, geez, those numbers are really staggering, from 85 to 270 million on the brink of starvation. I mean, and I know last time we talked, you were on your way to a lot of frontline locations, scrambling, from what I could hear, to get that food to people, to literally day by day save those lives. So again, a big thank you to you and to the whole team and to the whole organization for what you are doing. And maybe this is a great moment, given we have a lot of people listening in, to think about what needs to happen to get us through this particular moment in time, where clearly there is a bit of a hump in front of us. And we know that conflict, as you said, it was already a big source of increase in hunger and malnutrition, whether it be the Arab Spring that was linked to the climate, people migration, the challenge of that. But maybe if you could start peeling the onion a little bit and saying, what is it that in your eyes you would say we need to do to address in particular the challenge that we're facing right now? So some initial thoughts on that would be great.
You know, the biggest challenge is ending the wars. If I honestly believe if we can end the conflicts, end the wars, and there are dozens of conflicts taking place at any given time. That's what's driving hunger more than anything else, because we are building systems, better nutrition, better supply chains around the world, better partnerships in the private sector, the government, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of progress has been made, as we were talking about earlier, but the man-made conflicts are just driving those numbers out of the roof. We know, and when you feed 115 million people like we do, we survey a lot of people, talk to a lot of people, and we know what's going on, what they're thinking. For example, for every 1% increase in hunger, there's a 2% increase in migration. So if you don't get in and address root cause, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. I get this question from let's say a taxpayer from the Netherlands or the United States or Germany that would say, well, why should I send my money down to Niger or Mali when I've got bridge problems and road issues and healthcare concerns and school funding needs? And I'm like, well, you can do both. But let me say very clearly, if you don't address these concerns in these very poor countries that are struggling and are fragile, let me just give you an example in Syria. Because we didn't address the root cause and prevent the crisis in Syria, it's just been manifested, not exacerbated, but compounded beyond imagination. For example, we can feed a Syrian in Syria for about 50 cents a day. That same Syrian ends up in Berlin or Brussels, let's say, that's about 50 to 100 euros per day for the humanitarian support package. And guess what? The Syrian doesn't want to leave home. But if they don't have food, they don't have peace or security, they're going to do whatever they need to do for their children, the same that we would do for our children. So it ends up costing 1,000 times more after the fact. And so if we can get in ahead of the storm, so to speak, it's amazing what we can do. So first, let's end the wars. Number two, better systems. I don't think there's any question we have designed and built better food systems, supply chain, et cetera, than any time period in world history. But we're still not reaching that last, let's say, 700 million people. And try telling them that the world's better. Try telling them that systems are better. And so we don't want to tear down the systems that's given us the support and the success of the 90%, but what about that last 10%? So we've got to tweak it. We got to work hard. We got to be very vigilant. And that's where we've got to work together, because charity, philanthropy alone will not solve this problem. It's going to take the private sector's strategic engagement to truly, because that's been the motivating and driving force that's brought us the amount of wealth that's been shared with people all around the world. It's been the private sector that we've empowered and motivated, and the government providing incentives and the balancing that's all required. And we can get into a lot of weeds here, but when you look, let's say in the developing nations like in Sub-Sahara and developing nations in Asia, well, most of the people are smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers produce about 30% of the world's agriculture, but they produce about 90% in those particular areas, and that's about 90% of the economic employment. So we can't neglect, while we work on big farmings and macroeconomic issues in the agricultural community, we've got to work, and this is where working with DSM and other private sectors really paying off. And we can get into those weeds, because these people are impacted immediately and directly by conflicted, protracted crises with extremist groups, climate change. And so what can we do to help them survive in these most difficult circumstances? And at the World Food Program, we do that. I mean, just for an example, we don't just provide food, we actually help people rebuild their communities. And so our beneficiaries working with us, just in the past few years, past 4 or 5 years, our beneficiaries have rehabilitated 3.5 million acres of land. I mean, land that otherwise was producing nothing. And because of these techniques that we've designed and developed and working with the beneficiaries, capturing enough water so they can survive, coupled with we've built, oh gosh, 65,000 kilometers of roads, feeder roads, so they can get to the market, move their smallholder farm products along, et cetera, et cetera. 75,000 kilometers of canals, water canals for irrigation, 19,000 reservoirs and holding ponds, 7,500 bridges. So our beneficiaries are out there. And I say this because people think, oh, they just want to live on support. No, they don't. I tell you, I'm out there every day. I hadn't found one yet that wants to sit down and say, feed me. They want to be independent. They want to be self-sufficient. And the entrepreneurial spirit of women in these tough places is amazing. I mean, they have that entrepreneurial spirit. They want to take care of their family. They want to feed their village, and they want to sell to the marketplace. And this is where the private sector and us working together can really make a difference. But anyway, let me throw it back to you because you see I get pretty
No,
fired up about this.
yeah, exactly. And we know we can both discuss this for hours and hours and never run out of ideas. And I think one of the themes that we will probably have to park for today, and that is the impact of climate change. Otherwise, we will go, we will not have the time to discuss maybe what we can do in terms of partnerships. But I think you did mention it in your comment here. Let's not underestimate how food and climate just go together. And I know that I saw one statistic, which is that due to desertification, 40 million people get relocated away from their home every year, 40 million, because their land becomes basically unusable to produce food. So there is clearly already a huge topic on climate, but you've kind of put out there some really nice hooks on what can we do together. And I have to say that the partnership that we've had since I think 2007 has shown how it is essential for all parties, including the private sector, to care about this and to do something because we can. And for instance, it's nice to be able to share that, together we moved the dialogue from hunger to malnutrition. Because it's well known that calories is not enough. Actually,
Yeah.
nutrition in the first 1,000 days of life is what determines stunting and a prosperous life for people. So it needs to be malnutrition. But then came the structural, and I love the fact that you listed all of the infrastructure elements of what WFP is up to, because the discussion we had, what was it, 5, 6 years ago, was wouldn't it be great if actually we were able to produce some of that very nutrient-rich relief food that your teams bring to the desperate people in those countries, actually in Africa for Africa. And that was the start of Africa Improved Foods, which today sources in the region from 130,000 smallholder farmers that you mentioned. These are people who want to live off their land, but also reaches 1.6 million beneficiaries and created in Kigali, in Rwanda, 300 top-level jobs and skills. So it touches all of these developmental areas, which is how to truly solve the food challenge, you need to go to the root cause and actually try and structurally change that. But then the question would be to everyone listening, what are your learnings from partnerships, maybe like ours and others, where you partnered with the private sector, where you say, please step forward, these are things that can be done, this is, where the value comes from. So any learnings that you could share?
Oh my goodness, so we could share all day long because the private sector brings so much to the table. And this is one of the things that I felt like the UN and to some degree governments around the world has for years have shunned the private sector. But I think governments around the world are beginning to recognize that we can't solve poverty without private sector being front and center. And so I've really seen a tremendous awakening within the United Nations systems to bring the private sector into the equation. And that's not for money alone. Yes, of course, we would like some money from the private sector. That's great. And I can discuss that all day long. But I'm more interested in private sector engagement and walking alongside us, and how can we encourage and empower you to really bring your techniques and expertise out into the field in helping in hunger and helping smallholder farmers and helping with better nutritious products. Because I mean, you're like the leader in the world on nutrition. I mean, Super Cereal Plus and all the different things that we work with you on in making certain that children get not just calories, but the right calories, because that is a very important part in life, and we all understand that now. And it's like, the first 1,000 days of a kid's life, we understand that. We know how important that is. It's like building a car. When you're building the car, if you put on bad tires and a poor engine and poor seats, it's going to be a poor car for life. But if you build it right that first 1,000 days, well, the engine's humming, that maximizes the success. The child has the greatest opportunity for success versus stunting, wasting. And we know the economic impact of a child who has been stunted or wasted for a lifetime. And the GDP impact can be anywhere from 5 to 15% of a nation's GDP. And quantify that. I mean, if you got, for example, $400 trillion worth of wealth around the world today, and you do that in GP analysis, just do the 10%. It's a lot of money. It's a lot cheaper to invest. I think our number is for every $1 invested with right nutrition is a $27 return over the life of that particular child. And so invest wisely, because it will pay off in the long run. And if you don't, you go pay up in the long run. So.
Yeah, and I have to say, David, that this resonates fully, because what we've done at DSM is, and you said, use what you're good at to make an impact. And I think that's where we have found such a combination of strengths together, because DSM, of course, we are indeed the company of micronutrients. So we understand the science.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. I mean, we've partnered together now 15 years, and so why us? And what have you learned, and what do you think about that partnership? And
yeah, well, that's a nice one, and indeed, the time flies. I think for us, the biggest learning is, firstly, as a company, if you're going to be really impactful in doing things like this, it's a lot easier if you've embedded the SDGs in your strategy. So it doesn't come out of the blue. It's not on the side. It's not just. Philanthropy is good, don't get me wrong, but if it actually core to your skill sets, it will last, because you're building something which is structurally, it doesn't rely on donations, on extra funding. You need to try and build something which is going to have its own strong legs. And so one of the big learnings was, how do you demonstrate your strength and make it of relevance, of course, to an organization like WFP, but also very much evolve over time. So don't hesitate that you may feel you can't do a big step. So we started with, adding micronutrients to the emergency food, whether it be through the sprinkles, whether it be through the Super Cereal Plus that we developed, together for you, and that is already. And then we actually took it to Africa in terms of the production. And, to your GDP comments, there was an IFC study that showed that just this plant in Rwanda is actually bringing more than 800 million worth of economic value to Rwanda itself. And then, of course, we did that in partnership with the government of Rwanda, with development banks, with yourselves. And if we were, at first, it seemed like a very big endeavor. Now that it's flying, we say, well, you multiply that by 60, 70 times, and you've solved the insecurity of nutrition, at least the core nutrition. So the big learnings for us is, don't hold back from starting. Build the trust, I think, over time, to demonstrate that the intent is genuine and is anchored in core competencies that we can bring. And I would say, and you've mentioned it, never forget that the food systems is about hundreds of millions of lives and smallholder farmers, and the last mile is really what it's truly about. And that takes, you will not do that alone. And therefore, partnering is the way forward to get the end to end. Otherwise, we may be able to do a part. You'll be able to do a part. Governments will be able to do a part. But how does that all connect to truly structurally change the food picture? Is at least our learnings. And in that sense, uh, I mean, we were, together in Rwanda. We saw it on the ground. I don't know if there's an image that for you, maybe to close off a bit, that you would share with people as maybe a personal experience, that when your energy starts fading, you say, no, 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 no. It keeps you going. It gives you that kick not to.
Oh my gosh, And by the way, I was talking to President Kagame just last night about Rwanda and the opportunities of private sector. It was a great conversation. But when I think about all the personal stories, I mean, I've got some horror stories that are heartbreaking stories. And I've got some amazing stories. Just for example, I was just in Yemen, where we feed about 13 million people. It's the worst tragedy in the world right now as we speak. And I can remember uh, with this one child who literally was about to die, and we gave him some of this nutritional product. And I'm not kidding. That child within a day was a different child. Within 2 days was on the road to recovery. And I can be walking literally. It can be in Sana'a or it can be in Syria, in just war torn rubble. Buildings collapsed and bombed, and there's just concrete and blocks and debris, and out of that will come a child around the corner, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and it just gives you hope. It inspires you not to back down, to realize that's what it's all about. That child right there, that's a little girl, that's a little boy, and we can't give up on them. I mean, my dream is to put the World Food Program out of business. That's what I'd like to do. So we're no longer needed, but we can't do that with charity alone. It's got to be with the private sector, engage with us, taking ownership of these issues. Because if it's just charity, you got to depend on it every year, and hope and beg, and that's just not going to get us where we want. Though that is very important, but sustainable, resilient programs. That's where the private sector can help us with that child who no longer needs outside help, but is taking care of their own family, fulfilling their own dreams. And that's what happens when we partner together strategically, Geraldine. And that's what I love.
I love that challenge. And it may sound a bit provocative, but let's all work together to take the World Food Program out of business. And the faster, the better. And that will be the definition of success. Okay, that at least wakes people up, I think. And we have run out of time. We knew we were going to run out of time. Um, but I think, firstly, thank you for all the insights. Extremely helpful. Although, of course, a dark picture if we think of the challenge right now. But I think the learnings of the journey means that this is resolvable. So let's get on and do it. I think it's probably worth also highlighting that this year is a very important year in the sense there's COP26 on
Yeah.
climate. There's also the UN Food System Summit. And I think it is the moment where the link between climate and food is becoming finally understood, and that if food fails, everything else fails. You have unstable societies, you have conflict, everything fails. So climate and food are the two sides of the same coin. And now is the time for all of us to step forward and say what we can do to help address it structurally, and indeed not on the basis of donation and relief, but maybe at the root cause. So a big thank you, David, for your time. A big congratulations once again for the Nobel Prize to you and the team. We look forward to continuing our journey together, that's for sure. And for those of you listening, I do hope that you have found this inspiring, insightful, and even more so, it will urge you to step forward and see what you can do to help address zero hunger, malnutrition, and as a result, all SDGs in the coming weeks and months, because that's the kind of time frame we're talking about here. And as for the SDG tent, this is the space for this inspiration. So if you enjoyed this chat, then keep going, look forward. There are many more to come. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.